Psychopaths are a very interesting breed of people. I really wish I could go to a prison and just interview one for hours just to really get into the nitty-gritty of how they think. Imagine someone that has no empathy or remorse, a narcissist before anything else, and above all, someone who is paranoid and inclined towards violence. Toxic behavior. What is up, you guys? Hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hassan and welcome back to another video. Today we are gonna uncover the top 10 scary psychopaths that are roaming free. And it's not your ex. Plot twist. Starting off at number 10 is George LOVIE. This case is absolutely brutal, but here goes. In March of 1991, George sexually assaulted his girlfriend Michelle Edwards at knife point. After doing the deed, he told her he'd kill her family if she tried going to the police about it, but she did, and I think that was the smartest thing she could have done. One evening, 6 weeks later, however, George fulfilled his promise. Michelle walked out of her house to find him hiding under her porch waiting with a gun and a knife. She ran across the street to her parents' house and he followed, going inside and stabbing her parents Donna and Arnold to death in front of her. George was soon sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her parents and Michelle's attempted murder. In 2017 though, he was allowed unescorted absences into Sudbury, and by August of last year he was granted day parole and allowed to live in a halfway house. Now, the living Edwards family members are still terrified for their lives. Don, who is Michelle's brother, said he actually moved out of Canada specifically for this reason, and now they're just letting him walk free like he didn't threaten to kill an entire family. Don, I understand. I mean, I don't understand, but I totally agree with you, cause like, hello? Coming in at number 9 is Patrick Kelly. This former RCMP undercover agent worked in Toronto's drug squad back in the 70s, and I have a lot of respect for RCMP officers. Anytime I meet them while they're trotting around Toronto on their incredibly big horses, they're always really friendly and let me take a picture with the horse, because I always ask, because they're massive, but they also take massive shits on the road and it's just, that's annoying. Either way, Patrick on the other hand is a cold-blooded murderer. He probably would not let me take pictures with his horse. In 1981, he threw his wife Jeanette off the 17th floor balcony of the Palace Pier, killing her on impact. He testified claiming that she was leaning over the railing after she heard something rattle and then slipped and fell. Really, Patrick? She slipped and fell? Say the bullshit. Her body was found quite a distance from the railing and she could have only landed there had she been pushed quite hard and not just fallen. In 1984, he was convicted of her murder and was sentenced to life in prison with possibility of parole. Patrick has repeatedly been granted day and full parole since 2004, probably because of his past career, which I don't understand. He's violated his parole terms many times by secretly dating way too many women who don't know about his criminal past. In 2012, his parole was revoked because of that reason, but re-granted in 2016. So he's just walking around, allowed to do whatever, and ready to kill the next woman that falls in love with him. Brilliant. At number 8, we have Stephen KUMMERFELD. Back in 1995, 20-year-old Stephen thought he was untouchable since his grandpa was a Saskatchewan cabinet minister. One night, Stephen and his friend got drunk as hell while driving around Regina and eventually found an Aboriginal prostitute named Pamela Jean George. They picked her up and drove to a remote location before having sex with her and then beating her to death and leaving her body in a field near the airport. But Pamela was still alive when they left her there. The next day, Stephen was boasting about it in true psychopath fashion and said this to a friend: "We drove around, got drunk, and killed this chick." Like, how casual is that? How do you casually say that to someone? The two were soon charged with first-degree murder, but during the trial, when they asked if the sex was consensual, Stephen said she was indeed a prostitute, so obviously it was. And consent was what they needed for the charge to be manslaughter, not first-degree murder. After only serving 5 years in prison, he was granted full parole despite the parole board literally writing that he showed no remorse for the crime. His early parole angered everyone, especially the Aboriginal community in Saskatchewan, who thought it was extremely unfair and only a possibility because of his affluent background, and I 100% agree with them. Despotism gets you far, people, when it shouldn't. Filling at number 7 slot is Bill Nichols. After committing a string of heinous violent crimes in 1976, Bill topped it all off by murdering Keith Harrison, a Calgary police officer and father of 2, who was very quickly charged with many crimes including first-degree murder and was about to face the death penalty back when that was a thing. Lucky for him though, capital punishment was abolished and he became the first Canadian who murdered someone and would be handed a life sentence without parole instead of being killed. However, in some freak event, he was granted day parole in 1993 and full parole 3 years later. It's very clear he doesn't give a shit about the crimes he committed or the people he hurt, but he's still walking free like nothing happened. Now at number 6 is Craig MUNRO. Back in 1980, MUNRO was robbing a restaurant right here in Toronto and shot responding Constable Michael Sweet. But Michael didn't die from the wound, but he would unless he got medical attention ASAP. MUNRO held off any help from reaching him for 90 minutes while the constable begged for his life while bleeding to death. All the while MUNRO was just laughing in his face and mocking him about how he'd never get to see his 3 daughters again. This was such a traumatic scene for Sergeant Eddie Adamson, who was there, that it led to him committing suicide in 2005. MUNRO was given a life sentence for his crime, but as of 2010 he's allowed unescorted passes from a minimum security prison in British Columbia. Note how I said minimum security prison. Despite the fact he's been labelled a moderate risk to reoffend, he's still out here. Now whenever he applies for parole, Sweet's family, now a lot older, come to court sharing why he shouldn't be released. Michael's brother said he was still coming to terms with his brother's death despite it having been 30 years. MUNRO consistently blames his past actions on his drug and alcohol problem and that he's a changed man now, but cocaine was found in his system after an unescorted pass, so I mean, come on, this guy could kill again. He's clearly just talking shit. Coming in at number 5 is Michael YAREMA, Boxing Day 1988. 22-year-old Michael and his friends were after 21-year-old Terry Spindler, who had just violently robbed a local drug dealer's mum. I'm assuming the group were friends with the drug dealer and got pissed about the mum, I don't know. Either way, they found him at Kingston Bar and dragged him outside into a house. There they beat and tortured the shit out of him and ended the night by pissing all over his dead body. The group disposed of his body in Ganaraska Forest, and it was only after they killed him and the police were looking for him did they realize their mistake. It wasn't Terry who had been the robber, it had been his twin brother, meaning they had just killed an innocent man. Michael and the men were eventually caught and convicted of first-degree murder, meaning life in prison. In 2006, Michael took the witness stand to make his case for parole, claiming he found spiritual enlightenment in jail and regrets his choices every day. Despite getting life in prison, Michael was released before his 40th birthday and is currently just walking around really, just in your local Tim Hortons. At number 4 is DENIS LORTIE, formerly a Canadian Officers Corporal. In 1984, DENIS stole a bunch of weapons from a Canadian Armed Forces base and stormed into the Quebec National Assembly while opening fire. Dennis's past was filled with a lot. He was physically and sexually abused by his dad, he was discontent with the fact his English and French were not amazing, and he contemplated killing himself and his family because he thought he'd end up like his own dad. He shot up the assembly to show his annoyance with the governing party Quebecois because he blamed them for his problems. Dennis killed 3 government officials and wounded 13 others, and it was actually the Assembly's Sergeant-at-Arms René Jalberg that got the news and stopped him. He found Dennis and told him how he had also been a soldier at one point and took him to his office where they talked for over 4 hours. René got him to surrender to the military police and he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder in 1987. His psychiatrist disclosed that Dennis suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and had organized the crime during a psychotic episode. By 1995, Dennis had been granted parole to a halfway house where he had to be from 11 PM to 7 AM every day and was only allowed within 40 kilometers of the house. He was granted full parole in 1996, which means he's bloody out there, the man who is behind the deadliest event in Quebec history. Filling at number 3 slot is Jeremy MOLITOR. This guy had so much potential. He was a star in the Canadian amateur boxing community since he won gold in the welterweight division of the '98 Commonwealth Games, and he was dating beautiful 21-year-old Jessica Nethery. However, things took a turn for the worse when in 2002 Jeremy stabbed Jessica 58 times before leaving her body in some parked car in Sarnia. Now, I did a lot of research on this case, but I couldn't find out what the motive was or what provoked him, but in 2004 he was convicted of second-degree murder. Over the years, Jessica's family have pulled together the community anytime Jeremy has tried applying for parole to make sure it's not granted. However, in 2015 he won his appeal and is out on day parole and is dating someone. Jessica's sister Stephanie was horrified and said, "I just don't get how he can ruthlessly murder someone and go back to living life normally 14 years later." And I'd agree with you. Does your girlfriend know about your past, Jeremy? That you killed someone? I don't think she does. Otherwise she wouldn't be dating you. Now at number 2 is Harold SMELTZER. Back in 1980, Harold was driving around in Calgary when he saw 5-year-old Kimberly Thompson. He saw his target and opportunity and quickly snatched her off the road. Harold took Kimberly back to his house and then proceeded to drown her in the bathtub and then shove her body in a garbage bin. He was then convicted for first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison after also confessing to 40 other pedophilic sexual assaults. Despite all that, Harold was granted unescorted day parole in 2008, but that was then revoked in 2012 after he was caught with explicit underage videos. He even once came back from a parole date and admitted he was attracted to this young girl and nothing happened to him. His parole increases in 6-month increments and is super conditional, but I just don't get how Harold can be granted parole after violating it so many times and still being a pedo murderer. Like, hello, make it make sense. And finally, at number 1 is Jasmine Richardson, also known as Canada's youngest mass murderer. Congratulations for that title, Jasmine. Now this story is truly screwed up. I would use harsher words, but this is a PG channel. Back in April of 2006, at the age of 12, Jasmine told her 23-year-old boyfriend Jeremy Steinker to break into her house and kill her parents. Okay, before I get into that story, she is 12, her boyfriend is 23, she is 12! Gone through puberty? Have you gotten your period, Jasmine? I can't even. Now the parents disapproved of the couple's relationship considering she was freaking 12 and he was 23, as I've mentioned before. He also told Jasmine and her friends that he was a 300-year-old werewolf who liked the taste of blood, so there's that. They killed Jasmine's 8-year-old brother Tyler as well, so he couldn't be a witness. When their bodies were found the next day, Jasmine was nowhere to be found and a search went underway and the duo were arrested the next day. Obviously, in that one day, Jeremy had already proposed to Jasmine because nothing about this case makes sense. Now the youngest age where you can get charged for a crime is 12, but you have to be over 14 to get more than a 10-year sentence. She was 13 by the time she was convicted and was sentenced to 10 years in jail for being the youngest person ever convicted of multiple murders. Jeremy was also sentenced to 3 life sentences, just for anyone wondering about him. Jasmine completed her sentence in May of 2016 and was freed of any and all court-ordered conditions, and experts believe she was genuinely rehabilitated, and I definitely do believe people can change and redeem themselves, but that doesn't mean I want to meet Jasmine in the open, you know? If you're capable of that at 12, what are you capable of now, you know? And that is it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. This kind of freaked me out, but I kind of love cases and videos like this. I'm just weird like that. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. As always, I'm your host, Eamon Hassan, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, sheeple!